Record. Welcome to this latest edition of the Talking All vodcast. And I'm really happy to have an international guest with us today. It's Laura Dyer from the University of Leeds in the UK, of course. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm Laura. As Steve's already said, I work at the University of Leeds in the UK, and I'm a lecturer in English for academic purposes. And in particular, I have an interest in the skill side of English for academic purposes. Um, my particular interests lie in how emotions can affect students' learning and developing their skills, and what we can do as practitioners in order to help them feel more comfortable, in order to help them to develop to the level that they are capable of. Um, and it's through this that I actually came up with a theory or a framework, if you'd like to call it that, called PPCP, which is People, Place, Compassion, Power, which is the topic or the title of this chat today.
Excellent. Um, that sounds super interesting. I want to back step one little part. You said you're a lecturer in academic skill. Did you say academic skills?
Yeah, English for academic
Purposes, you
purposes.
did. That's interesting. So is that a concurrent program alongside of their course of study?
So English for academic purposes can take place in two ways. It could be pre-study or it
Yep.
could be concurrent.
Yep.
I'm currently working concurrently with the students, so I'm supporting them with their language development and their skills development as well.
Okay.
And it's mostly international students I'm working with, though we're going to roll it out to home students or domestic students as well this year.
And is it offered, generally speaking, in first year undergraduate? Is that sort of the how it works?
So I'm working primarily with master's students, though I do have one group of first year undergrads.
Fascinating. Great. Okay. We do have some sort of comparative foundational programs we do, but generally speaking, we work in that space in pre-service, which I did before I was at the university I'm at now. The previous university, I worked in pre-service. Now I'm in concurrent service, but in academic skills. So a bit different, yet similar as to what you're talking about. Anyway,
Yeah.
let's talk about the PPCP initiative, which we're here to talk about, as you say. So, can you tell us a bit about that? How did it start? How did it originate? What are its aims? Yeah, tell us a bit about
So,
that.
so it's kind of a long story. So I've been working in English for academic purposes for about 15 years now, and for a long time, I've watched students really struggle to be themselves because perhaps it's the characters, their personalities, or just they don't want to do things that make them stand out from other people. And I really think, how can I make these situations better for the students to show what they're actually capable of? So, for example, you get students to watch each other presentations, and say, oh, what, can you give some feedback to that student? And they say, oh, it's excellent. And like, yeah, but it
What
wasn't
else?
perfect, what else? Yeah. And I actually thought, thinking back to my own days at university, if I'd been asked to do that, I probably would have done the same because I wouldn't want to tell someone, oh, I didn't really understand your presentation, but I don't want to feel bad, make them feel bad, and I don't want to look rude. So I was thinking, how can I create this situation where the students can be honest and show what they actually think, and without fear of them having any repercussions, saving face, or the receiver of that feedback getting angry with them.
Mhm.
And initially many years ago, I started giving out strips of paper, write your feelings about this presentation on this paper. Don't put your name on it. And I'm going to give it back to the presenter. And that got a little bit, I didn't understand your grammar in this section, for example, but most of it was still all, yeah, this is really good. This is really interesting.
Mm.
Um, and then it kind of just, well, I'll keep trying. But then the pandemic happened. And I think for a lot of people, that changed everything. And during the pandemic, I had my first few groups that I was teaching were really enthusiastic, trying to make the best of the situation. They knew we were all in this really difficult situation. But then the third group of students I taught were particularly challenging.
Mhm.
So, for example, they'd all have their cameras off, all have their
Mm,
microphones off.
mm,
I'd ask a question, nobody would say anything. I say, put the message in the chat. There'll be nothing in the chat. And I was like, this is really, really difficult group. And then my module leader had put on the timetable that the students had to give each other peer feedback for their presentations. One of the things I've been working on for many years to try and get right. And I just thought this is not going to work
yeah.
with these students. They're not going to give peer feedback. They can't even switch the cameras on. They don't speak. What can I do? So I came up with this technique, and what I did is I paired the students, and they would watch the presentations. So these were pre-recorded presentations. So they'd watch the presentations of two other students, and then I would put the pairs into breakout rooms, and they would have to discuss these two presentations in that pair. When I went to these breakout rooms, the cameras were on. First time I'd seen these students.
Mm,
They were talking. First time I'd heard them speak. And what they were talking about was unbelievable. It was like, I had no idea that they could do this. And something obviously just clicked. And I
mm,
thought, what is it about this activity, this adaptation that has made the students talk like this and become involved like this? And I came to the realization it was because they had this kind of semi-anonymity. So
mm,
they were creating the feedback, they were talking about these presentations, and they weren't afraid to share their opinions, what they didn't like about the presentations, because the presenter was not there. The presenter couldn't hear them. And that's kind of what led into me thinking more in more detail about how I can take this forward and develop something from it. Um, and after some reflection, I thought, well, what did I do differently? And I thought, well, I thought about the people involved in the activity. So I just had two people involved analysing these presentations. I thought about the place. So the place I put them in was a private breakout room, so they could talk about what they wanted. And then I thought, I've allowed them to be semi-anonymous in this
mm,
because they'll give feedback afterwards,
mm.
but the presenter wouldn't know exactly who had given any bad feedback. So I thought, well, that's a bit of compassion there for the students because they're semi-anonymous. They can say what they want. And then from that, I have to say that after that session, after that lesson, the subsequent sessions, cameras were on,
Mm.
students were asking questions,
A real turning point.
and they developed this power. I
Yeah.
was like, okay, it's people, place, compassion, power. Ah, okay.
Ah, it labeled
So
itself.
yes, it labels itself.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a
Yeah.
great story. Okay, so how have you how have you leveraged that? How have you sort of moved on from there? Because that sounds like a really good launching
Yeah.
pad to have that being enacted in all your classes all the time.
Yeah. So I thought, well, can I do this with anything else? And I started to think, well, what other maybe activities have students got, perhaps challenges with? Presentations, for example. So I applied it to presentations. And then I thought, well, other activities students might have problems with listening to lectures. So, for example, thinking back to my experience during my master's, I had 3 hour lectures.
Mm, mm,
I'd switch off for 5 seconds and I'd miss the entire point of the whole lecture. So I think, how can I help students listen to 3 hour lectures, especially if English is not their first language? How can I
mm,
do that? And so I applied PPCP to that as well. So I came up with something called dialogic presentation. And then I also did something called the listening tag team. So the students would be in a group of two or three, and they'd do intensive listening, perhaps at 20-minute spurts, and then they'd pass on to their partner, tag, your turn, you go
mm,
next.
mm.
And that, was really thinking about helping them. They don't have to listen for long periods. They can just listen extensively, but when it's their turn to listen, they do it really intensively.
So, I read a little bit about the dialogic presentation idea that you had, and this idea of um, uh, the effective relational aspect of students being empathetic and sympathetic when someone else is
Yeah.
presenting, the idea of having the breakout room with two people, the idea of partnering them up in lecture listening context. It sounds like you've really hooked into this idea of the socially mediated or effective relational aspect of learning, which I'm particularly very interested in because I think
Yeah.
it that humanistic aspect is a huge part of learning that in my interest area, Gen AI, as good as
Yeah.
it is, cannot replicate, never will.
Mhm.
Um, which seems to be a real touch point of what you are talking about. Could you talk a bit more about it? Is that the thing for you? Is that
Yeah.
the hub of it?
Yeah. Because, traditionally, education is all about pleasing the teacher,
Mm,
make the teacher happy. And then the teacher has this content they've got to teach. Like, we've got to give the students this information, they have to do it. They don't think about how the students might feel when having to do that. So if you tell the students, the student's really happy with their module or in their course, and suddenly, yeah, your assessment is a 30-minute presentation. It's like, oh, how does the student feel about that? It can be overwhelming. And, thinking to my own experience of
mm.
giving presentations, I always thought, why can't I write an essay? Because I could have done it in an essay, but you're asking me to do a presentation and I'm just too nervous.
Yeah,
And it's not getting the best out of me to do it
yeah.
this way.
That's so interesting because it also speaks to the idea of, universal design for learning, right? So trying to meet students where they are or where
Mhm.
they can best contribute or show their learning, which has echoes of that as well. So there's some resonance, I think, for the academic skills advising context in speaking to the students at their point of need
Yeah.
or understanding that relational emotive aspect. I really think that's important, and I like what you're doing in that space.
Yeah.
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 Um, have others been catching on to this, do you think? Has it? I know you've written a book, so there's
Yes. The books,
word
the book
will get
is,
out.
the book is, I've heard that the book is due to be published in November.
Oh, feel free to plug it. Go ahead.
Okay. It's called Humanistic Approach to English for Academic Purposes Pedagogy, People, Place, Compassion, Power. Now, although it says English for Academic Purposes Pedagogy, it's just because it's my context, but a lot of it would apply to many other contexts as well. So, academic skills, working with international students, in fact, working with many students, and I actually say that in the book, it's People, Place, Compassion, Power, PPCP is very broad. It's
Mm.
not specific just to one disciplinary area. So it can be applied, you know, in my opinion, it can be applied anywhere. Some subjects might say, no, you can't do it in ours, but let's say almost everywhere or everywhere.
If you had to sort of summarize it, just to sort of wrap this up, if you had to sort of summarize it in one brief paragraph, how would you summarize the PPCP framing?
So it's for us as practitioners to recognize that the students have emotional needs and to give them the opportunity to show what they're actually capable of. So we can use this in our planning and designing phase, if you think about Advanced HE's fellowship, or we could use it in other parts. You might just make a change during the lesson, like, oh, I'm going to change this just because of the student's needs in this point. But it's really just allowing the students to have that power. How can we allow them to show us what they're actually capable of? Try not to control them, let them be free.
Excellent. I think that has resonance for us, academic skills advising audience in both of our one-to-one and group learning situations because we teach things like oral presentation skills or
Yeah.
we do embedded work within subjects and talking about these type of things. So it's really good to hear you talk about this. It's super interesting. Um, look forward to seeing your book when it comes out.
Okay. Thank you.
Um, Laura, thanks very much for talking to us. I found this fascinating. I'm sure our listeners will as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.